There's a story, we talked about earlier, I guess, in the week and last week as well, the news when the Gazette, of course, we found out was going to be losing part of its newsroom here, 25% of staff being laid off. And we talked about that. And we see a story today, again, something that a lot of people here in this city liked, enjoyed. Eater Montreal, which was a site dedicated to food and restaurants and people who worked in the business and had done, we were both surprised by this, had done fairly well.
Well, it was a small staff. So you think, well, how come they can't survive? It's not like it was a huge production line. We're talking about a pretty trim staff, and so why can't they?
And I was surprised to read, by the way, this has been around for the last 15 years. I wasn't even aware it had been around that long, but now it's gone, and it received numerous awards for its achievements in food journalism and media. And we thought, how's this happening, and what does it mean? So we thought, let's find out. Leslie Chesterman used to be the Gazette food and restaurant critic, still very much involved in this scene right now. And I thought, who better to find out more about this than Leslie herself? Hey, Leslie.
Hi, Erin. Hi, Natasha.
Hi.
Great to have you here. Thank you for taking the time today. So let's talk about Eater Montreal. How surprised were you to hear about this, and how serious is this?
Well, Eater Montreal came in not 15 years ago, I don't think, but really I think it was sooner than that. I'm not sure about the dates, but Eater Montreal came in with the big Eater site, which is owned by Vox Media. And Eater was kind of the big site where a lot of great food writers worked and got started, and really kind of took over with this kind of cool food writing, more edgy, like where to eat at Disneyland instead of where to eat in Paris, kind of stuff like that. And they started opening up different pages for different cities. So, Eater New York, Eater Atlanta, et cetera. And then then they opened up Eater Montreal. There was an Eater Toronto and Vancouver. Toronto and Vancouver didn't last that long. But Montreal really held on, and mostly because the first person who started writing, who was in charge of the Eater Montreal site, was a guy called Ian Harrison, who was excellent. And he followed up with a guy called Tim Forster and another girl called Valerie Silva. And they were fantastic, that trio. And then after Valerie left, I don't know, what position they were in to find somebody new. But a lot of people don't realize that Eater was not only good for us. I mean, I would consult Eater too, but it was really good for tourists who came to the city to see where to eat, because they updated their lists all the time. The lists were excellent. My only beef with Eater is that they didn't give enough money to any of the people who wrote for them to actually eat out in any of these restaurants. So all these lists were compiled based on other reviews like mine or the French press or whatever. So they were strong lists, but they weren't based on first-hand knowledge. It's always building off other media outlets.
But this is a kind of a trend we've been seeing, right? I mean, since you left the Gazette, it seems to me they had a trio that was writing after you. And I don't even remember the last time I saw something written specifically about restaurants in the Gazette. What do you think about this sort of lack of coverage, and what does it mean for the Montreal restaurant scene?
Well, of course, during the pandemic, a lot of those posts were kind of eliminated just because there was nothing to write about. And so after the pandemic, a lot of people who want to come back were offered lower salaries. So, already the salaries weren't great. And then, so, people want to move on and find other jobs in the food world, which aren't always that easy to find. But it's true that the newspapers have really dropped the ball. I mean, the Gazette, absolutely. But in Toronto, there is not one restaurant reviewer. And this ultimately is really bad for restaurants because they've got to get the word out. I mean, now they have social media to help them. But you don't have really one voice telling you where to go or recommending solid places. So it's a bit more of a gamble when you go to eat out. And now eating out is so expensive, by the way, so much more than it was pre-pandemic. So you are taking a bit more of a gamble, and we're relying now on sites like TripAdvisor, on sites like Yelp to tell us, to give us reviews of where to go. And it's not solid information, I find, anymore. It's just a little bit of everything everywhere.
Yeah, and there's always that nagging doubt, right, in the back of your mind. You read a review for people who do before they go out and think, wait a sec, that seems too good, or did someone help write this? I mean, that's still a consideration for a lot of people, and I'm sure people who own these places, everyone's trying to make a living, right?
Well, there's something else that's happened, Erin, that you mentioned that. It's that, back pre-COVID, when I was a restaurant critic, and a lot of us could really criticize restaurants because there were too many restaurants in the city and they were expensive, and people liked that kind of restaurant writing where, I don't want to say you'd go for the jugular, but you wouldn't hold back on the honesty, okay? So now, post-pandemic, it's very rough to go after, I don't want to say go after, because I don't think we are, but to criticize restaurants when they're having not enough people to work for them. Ingredients cost a fortune. Prices have gone up. Customers apparently are even more difficult now, unbelievable, than since before the pandemic. So you're getting a lot of restaurant reviews that are really cushioning up all the criticism. You're like, really? Like, is it really? So we're kind of even losing confidence in reading critical writing because it's gotten so soft.
Right, because it's all based on people who've attended, who've gone themselves and written there. Like, we're looking on Yelp, we're reading the reviews from people who've gone themselves, and then, like you said,
we don't want to take that risk of offending anybody at a time when they're hurting.
But is that even happening?
I'm so glad I'm not doing it anymore.
But is it even? Is anybody doing it now, Leslie, in Montreal?
Well, in La Presse, they do have a restaurant reviewer. Le Devoir does not have a restaurant reviewer, really. And even La Presse, they approach it in kind of a softer way than it used to be done. The Gazette, no. And like I said, Toronto, no restaurant reviewers. There's still a restaurant reviewer at the Globe and Mail, but that's for Western Canada, for places like Winnipeg and Calgary, and then there's one in Vancouver. But they're few and far between. And the problem is also not only do newspapers not have money to keep their staff from being cut drastically, they're not going to start handing out hundreds of dollars for people to eat out. And yet those are the columns often in the Gazette that were really well read. They were very popular. But, the people who make the decisions are news people and not arts and life people, right?
So if we can just talk on a larger scale with respect to restaurants, we mentioned how that scene has changed, how the pandemic obviously began to change that. Where are we at now in Montreal as far as that goes? Is it going to be only the really upscale restaurants that are continuing to stay busy that will survive? Or are you seeing more restaurants decide it's not worth it anymore? What are you seeing?
Well, I do see one list I will really recommend is one by Cult Montreal. Cult Montreal's kind of picked up the ball a little bit here. And their latest list of the best restaurants in Montreal, I think I've been to one of the 25. They're all very new. It's not the newest. They're saying it's the best. I mean, Schwartz's is on the list, too. We've all been to Schwartz's. But there are a lot of new places. They're a lot more casual. That can be expensive, but, not over-the-top expensive. There's not any very expensive restaurant on their list. They're kind of all young chefs who are just opening restaurants. So look for the Cult Montreal one for kind of the hot happening restaurants. Now, would I take my parents there? I'm not so sure. Would I go myself? I talk about my parents, but, I'm 55. So what am I talking about at this point? But no, it's kind of the scene has definitely changed.
Yeah,
it's a whole wave of new restaurants.
I love what you said too about how 6:30 is the new 8 o'clock. You are so right. When you go out to restaurants now at 6:30, they are absolutely packed, and then by 8:30 they start to get quiet. I think what I'm trying to figure out, Leslie, is why is it no longer viable? People still obviously want to eat out. Yes, the way we're dining out is changing. Were these reviews kind of based on ad revenue, and that ad revenue simply isn't there anymore, and so you can't justify the cost? Like, why can't we still have good coverage in English of our Montreal restaurant scene?
Well, that is that situation of they don't want to give the restaurant reviewers a budget to eat out because they don't have the money anymore. Certainly ad revenue. Let's not also forget that anybody after a certain point, I think after Helen Rochester passed away at the Montreal Gazette, that went from being a staff position to being a freelance position. And as newsrooms cut down their staff numbers, they will also cut down drastically their freelance numbers because of the union. So, there are fewer and fewer freelancers. And, there are some people who will write reviews for $50 a review. But if you want to make a living out of doing that kind of work, the money's just not there anymore because the priority's not there anymore. But there's this whole other sideline of people setting up Substacks, of people setting up, reviewing a lot of things just in Instagram stories. I mean, I see the stuff and I'm like, the new review is it's a 5-page Instagram story, So I just think you kind of do have to follow people you trust. And I think we're going to get to the point where it's more word of mouth from friends, if you trust your friends. But, there's another side to it, too, that a restaurant review wasn't just thumbs up or thumbs down. But you talk about a little of the history of the restaurant. I always thought there were more about the city themselves.
It's a story.
Just about a restaurant.
Yeah.
It's about the whole culture of eating out. And it's a real shame because this is a great part of living in Montreal. And if we're not going to talk about what's going on in our food scene, or if all the news that we get comes out of a central desk in, Brampton, Ontario, we're not eating the same way in Saskatoon as we are eating in Montreal, right? So there are a lot of problems now with this whole scene.
So what happens now, and I remember reading something a while ago, and obviously when you're not in the business, these things come as surprises, right? Michelin stars handed out to restaurants, that was always a sign that, this must be a really great restaurant. Toronto's got their own now, and then I found out you have to pay a whole lot of dough to get these things.
Well, there are a couple of rumors going around that some of the people who got Michelin stars maybe are pretty tight with Michelin, and that's a big claim to make. So I hope that, somebody somewhere wants to break open that whole story. But, the thing is about a Michelin-starred restaurant is it's about good food for sure. There's nobody who has a Michelin star who doesn't have good food, but it's also a lot about everything around the plate. It's about the cutlery, it's about the scenery, it's about the quality of the service, it's about the incredible wine list. And that's why if you look at that list in Cult Montreal of all the kind of up-and-coming restaurants in Montreal, none of those young chefs could care less about having a Michelin star.
Isn't that
they
interesting?
Just want a good restaurant that they make a profit and they're full every night. That's all they want.
Can't ask for a whole lot more than that. Hey, Leslie, I want to thank you for taking the time this afternoon.
I just want to say I'm still drooling. I follow you on social media and your posts of the stuff that you've been making, including just the most simple but delicious-looking vanilla cake for your husband. I'm still I'm drooling.
But that's another issue, too, is I think a lot of us maybe finally are cooking more at home. And when you see that, I saw a restaurant they wanted to go to, their steak, it used to be $26. It's now $36. Just trying to ask ourselves some questions about maybe we should learn to cook.
It's true.
It's true. Never asked myself that question.
Not you, Aaron. Don't ask
thank
yourself.
you, Leslie.
Has spoken, yes.
Leslie Chesterman, thank you so much, Leslie. We'll see you soon.
Take care, guys.
There
Bye.
you go. So, Eater Montreal gone, but as she said, you might want to check that one by
Cult Montreal.
Yeah.
What do you know?
And I know Michael Cohn just sent a note. Mike Cohn from the Suburban does his own restaurant reviews in there as well, right?
It's true. We got to keep it up. Got to keep spreading the word.
Ask your friends.